is here, and so is the long-awaited final season of Game of Thrones. This means we need something to fill the void that will be left behind after the series comes to an end. What's not to love in Game of Thrones? The complex politics and strategy, the sex and the violence, or the deep family drama and moral shades of grey. And, of course, the dragons. We've put together a list of games that touch upon one or more of these aspects to give you your Game of Thrones fix after it's all done. Here are 10 games for Game of Thrones fans. The Banner Saga is the game for fans that think they know better than all the leaders of Westeros. Making difficult decisions is at the core of this game. Outside of battle, you're often confronted with choose-your-own-adventure type choices, which can have serious consequences later on in the game. This makes for a game that lends itself to multiple playthroughs. There are truly different paths that depend on your choices. Much like Game of Thrones' deep story, it's the little details that make this beautiful hand-drawn world. And if you're hungry for lengthy battles, in some scenes, you'll be given the option to delay your victory with the addition of enemy reinforcements. This gives you the chance to earn more powerful items and further your character growth, but at the expense of possibly injuring your favorite heroes. Banner Saga Trilogy is almost like playing through a Game of Thrones visual novel, but one that's made by the old members of BioWare. The setting in space is the exact opposite of the fantasy genre, but Mass Effect has a lot of similarities with Game of Thrones. After all, fantasy is not all that makes Game of Thrones what it is. This game has the same tropes of an all-destructing ancient force coming back. As you have the White Walkers and the Wall in Game of Thrones, you have the Reapers and the Citadel in Mass Effect. The game's all about figuring out how to make everyone work together to fight the bigger threat. The series' narrative, character development, universe, and emphasis on player choice affecting the experience make it a good fit for those that like the complex and harsh world of Game of Thrones. And in Game of Thrones fashion, you can set yourself up for a myriad of weird romances, hooking up with your aunt, or hooking up with an alien, whatever you want really. An obvious choice for fans that need their Game of Thrones fix. It's a good tie-in game for the series, with actors from the show, and it expands on the lore of the existing Game of Thrones universe. The game is filled with surprising and shocking moments, lots of drama, and of course a high body count. It will leave you feeling absolutely awful in the perfect Game of Thrones kind of way. It has some flaws and got mixed reviews, but die-hard fans will still enjoy that extra chance to spend more time within Westeros. Civilization V is a classic top-down strategy game and one of the better empire builders out there. It's similar in ways to Game of Thrones in the themes of diplomacy and warfare. Instead of fights and feuds between families, it's between nations. But in essence, the game features the same sense of power and conflict. With deep and nuanced diplomacy, you can bluff and fight your way to victory. But stay on your toes, because other world leaders can be just as cunning and deceitful as Littlefinger. Be sure to check out the really good mods too. The Dark Souls series is for those fans that just long for bloodshed and impossibly tough fights. Dark Souls has some epic fights, just like the Viper vs. the Mountain. Every fight is an enormous struggle to stay alive. The combat in the game is really hard to master, and every time you think you've faced the toughest enemy, a new, even tougher one appears. It's great for those of you that like a challenge. And just when you think you're really getting the hang of it and thinking you're unstoppable, and you say, "Today I've conquered it all," you're dead 2 seconds later. Game of Thrones is known for something. It's the numerous shocking character deaths. See Ned Stark. Fire Emblem is also known for that. You have permanent character deaths. If a character dies, they can no longer fight in-game, requiring you to either restart the entire chapter or continue without them. The long-running series comprises strategy and role-playing games with deep tactical elements that increases depth with every move you make. As you make your way through, you'll meet and bid farewell to many allies. But which ones will you choose, and how will you use them to your advantage? If you like nothing more than the feudalistic strategies, politics, backstabbing, arranged marriages, and war in Game of Thrones, Crusader Kings 2 is one of the better games that explores this. What makes it even more of an ultimate Game of Thrones experience, apart from some really good mods, is the use of the characters in the game. While certain lords hate one another, others earn each other's respect. Play as a powerful and ruthless lord like Tywin Lannister, or scheme your way around and create chaos like Littlefinger. But be warned though, the game is so complex it may feel like the beginning of Game of Thrones, when you were first trying to get a handle on all the storylines, history, families, and betrayals. Before HBO acquired the rights for Game of Thrones, and before Bethesda was making Skyrim, Bethesda was asked to make a Game of Thrones game. Unfortunately, the team declined, citing concerns when adapting someone else's work, however good it may be. They wanted to expand on their own worlds and lore. Fortunately for us, they succeeded at making a vast, immersive story world worthy for Game of Thrones fans. Both in the game and in the series, the death of a king is the catalyst of political turmoil. Dragons start appearing after many years, and a special dragon person rises. Try Skyrim if you want one of the most fully realized, easily enjoyable, and all-engrossing RPG games ever made. But beware, just like in Game of Thrones, you have to keep an eye out at weddings. The setting of Dragon Age Origins is inspired by A Song of Ice and Fire and Lord of the Rings. Developed by BioWare just like Mass Effect, it also relies on the similar trope of a mythical, dangerous force. You start as a Grey Warden, trying to prepare the land to defend itself against a threat that has been gone for too long. Though none of the other lords, except for a handful, believe that the threat is real. Your goal is to try and make people come to their senses and understand that an ancient evil has returned in such a number which would devour the world if left unchecked. Deep and expansive, Dragon Age Origins can ably occupy the many fantasy-focused hours that once filled your Sunday nights. Story-wise, The Witcher is not that similar to Game of Thrones, except that it's an epic fantasy story. What really makes this game good for Game of Thrones fans is the similar dark and gritty tone. The Witcher is set in a war-torn landscape, and there's lots of violence and fear present in the world. Like the series, the game has a vast story world with lots of characters, all with their own in-depth storylines. One of the series' strong qualities is that characters are almost never purely good or evil. This moral gray area is also very present in The Witcher 3. Game of Thrones fix or not, The Witcher is a beautiful, cohesive, mature game that's frequently awe-inspiring. This is one adventure that you don't want to miss. Have you played a game recently and thought that it feels a part of the Game of Thrones world? Let us know in the comments.